The views expressed in this interview are those of the individuals and do not reflect the official policy or position of the U.S. government, the Department of Defense, the U.S. Navy, or the Naval Postgraduate School. Welcome to the Trident Room, brewer of stout conversation, unfiltered and on tap. On today's episode, Trident Room host Karl Flynn sits down with Colonel Jason Perry.
So, sir, first of all, thank you for taking the time out of your day to join us.
Thank you.
Very honored and excited to have this opportunity to just have a discussion with you. So,
yeah, this will be fun.
Oh, I'm excited for it as well. So, just to start out, I have your bio pulled up from the NPS website. So,
all right.
Commissioned in '94, and then did your platoon commander time in 2nd Battalion, 1st Marines.
Correct.
And then, just as a side note, I was reading General Jason Baum's book. Was that when you crossed paths with him back then?
I was his executive officer, right? So I did one deployment as a platoon commander, and then the second deployment I was an executive officer and company executive officer, and I was General Baum's executive officer at that time.
Okay, got it.
Incredibly formative time.
Coming straight from my platoon commander time, I definitely believe that. I just thought it was interesting reading the book, and it says First Lieutenant Perry. I'm just like, I know a Colonel Perry. I wonder if that's the same.
That would be me. That's right. We were the two Jasons. His name is Jason Baum. My name is Jason Perry. We were the two Jasons, and he actually, Captain Baum, promoted me to captain. He was, of course, a more senior captain, and I had been in the battalion for some time. I PCS'd from there to NPS. That's when I came here as a student.
Okay.
When I finished up there at Pendleton.
Okay. And then, so coming here, you were on the FAO track specifically for Japan, correct?
Correct. It was actually the Marine Corps did not have a Japan study track FAO program at the time. The FAO program was kind of a newish thing.
Okay.
And so there was one officer that was at DLI, had finished NPS. I was the second. I didn't go to DLI, so I went straight to Japan from here because I came into the Marine Corps with a degree in Japanese. But so yes, at the very, call it plank owner, at the very beginnings of the Foreign Area Officer Program, especially as it relates to Japan, came here. Yeah, it's a great experience.
That's okay. So that's very
It's
interesting.
just another way of saying I'm really, really that old.
Well, what was interesting to me about that is because a couple of the other podcast hosts, they're also in the FAO program, and so they're going straight to DLI for their respective languages. So I think it's interesting that it's like, oh, well, you already speak Japanese, so off you go.
Yeah, that was kind of I was interested in. Like I said, I'd spent some of my I had taken a couple years off while I was in college and lived in Japan and got fairly proficient at that time, and then came back to the U.S. after that 2 years ended and majored in Japanese in my undergraduate program, always knowing I wanted to come into the Marine Corps. So I came into the Marine Corps after that, and then this thing called the FAO program came out, and I hope General Baum doesn't mind me saying this, but I actually talked to Captain Baum at the time about it. He said, "Jason, don't do it," And he said, "That's." And at the time, it really was. At the time, it was sound advice, and it was. There's a real risk to your career because of the timing issues and because the program wasn't really established and it wasn't managed the way we manage it now. And so, Captain Baum's advice was sound. Of course, me as a first lieutenant, I was like, "Sir, who said anything about a career?" And so I, at I guess my own peril, went ahead and moved forward with it. And who knows? Maybe it will in my career one day, but so far it's been okay.
Well, based on everything, looking through your bio, obviously going back to Japan and serving in multiple capacities. Which I definitely want to get into later on. But
Sure.
It looks like it definitely did a lot of good from here up to this point, at least.
Yeah, I don't know if we stumbled into it or if it was actually managed from somewhere, but I would say I have been abundantly blessed to be able to both pursue a career as an infantryman, which is my first career choice, right? and then to be able to bring in my experiences as a Japan Foreign Area Officer, and those experiences really starting here in Monterey, and to be able to merge those when it made sense, and when it made sense to that I needed to be elsewhere, to be able to move on elsewhere and know that there was a pathway for me to continue to have opportunities to contribute, which is, and so I feel very fortunate.
Absolutely. Definitely a very unique ability to contribute in that capacity. I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but just looking through your bio.
Yeah.
So in terms of your work as specifically in the capacity of being a foreign area officer. So you served as the country director for Japan Asia Pacific Security Affairs.
Yes.
From 2004 to 2007.
Yeah.
And then
that was an interesting little development. I could tell you that story. It was fun how that ended up happening. But go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
So next up, Marine Corps Forces Pacific Liaison to the Japan Self-Defense Forces from 2015 to 2016.
That's right.
That, I'm sure there's a lot we can discuss there. And then obviously in your capacity as 4th Marines CO, I'm sure working with not just the JSDF, but also just the local Japanese government on Okinawa as well, I'm sure.
Yes. That was what just amazing experience. Yeah. I was a captain on the USS Essex in Singapore, and I had orders to a location to go to do a FAO utilization tour. And this was after 9/11. I arrived at the battalion just prior to 9/11, and so after that, I was deployed. I think I was on in the 3 years I was stationed in Hawaii, I was on Hawaii about 8 months. And the balance of that time I was deployed. So I'm on the Essex in the wardroom, and the battalion commander comes in and says, "Hey, Jason, SecDef wants to see you upstairs."
All right.
Okay, Captain Perry. So I go up to the deck, up to the flight deck, and it was not, in fact, the Secretary Rumsfeld. It was the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, who was a Marine general. And I walked up, and he said something along the lines of, "Jason, we've got some big moves coming up with Japan. I want you to come over to OSD and be a part of the team. What do you think?" And I'm thinking, I got a pretty good gig lined up right now, sir. But what do you say? And I said, "Well, hey, sir, I'm all in." And so as we were walking away from that conversation, I looked at the battalion commander and I said, "Hey, sir, what's OSD?" He said, "Well, that's the Office of Secretary of Defense." So short, here I am, a captain, and I get assigned to OSD. They kind of created a billet there for me to go and fill. And it was really an interesting time, because at the time we were doing what's called a global posture review and realigning under Secretary Rumsfeld's leadership at the time and President Bush. We were realigning our forces to deal with more of a global response posture. So crisis response. This is, the argument that we are currently in a post-Cold War posture. We now have global reach capability, and therefore we need to realign our forces that are forward stationed in Europe and in Asia, so that we have more strategic flexibility in the employment of those forces, and that we need to leverage the emerging technology that we have, right?
Sounds familiar.
Sounds familiar, right? Yeah, I mean, this conversation doesn't end. And so we entered this dialogue with the government of Japan that to realign our forces in Japan, and also to realign Japanese force capabilities and their role in the defense of Japan and in regional security, and And so it was a really dynamic, really exciting time. I learned a lot. I had no business being there, but there I was, and it was interesting because some of the tasks at the time, come from company command. I'm writing company operations orders, first platoon seize the right object, that sort of thing, to writing U.S. national policy and negotiating with the interagency. Nothing in my experience would have prepared me for that, except for the time that I had spent in Glasgow Hall at Naval Postgraduate School learning about national security affairs. And so what do you do when you don't know, when you don't really know what to do? You lean on the education you've received. And so for me, that was when, all of a sudden my NPS education became a lot more relevant. So it was really a formative time, but a great experience. Never worked so hard in my life. I don't know if that's true, but it was an awfully busy time.
I can imagine going straight from the tactical to national level.
That's
would be
right.
Yeah. So looking at your bio, so if I understand this correctly, were you a rifle company commander in 2-3?
Correct. Okay. Well, I did 3 deployments because 9/11 happened and we were gone. So I did a counterinsurgency deployment down in the Philippines. We set up a task force and worked with some special operations folks, some Army folks down in the southern Philippines initially, and then a subsequent deployment as a rifle company commander, and then 3rd deployment as a weapons company commander.
Okay.
Right. So really fortunate.
Yeah, that's definitely a large breadth of experience. So when you say the southern Philippines, I assume like Mindanao area?
Yeah, I was specifically on Basilan Island, and then
Okay.
and then I had detachments up in Zamboanga and places like that doing. This was at the very early days of our counterinsurgency efforts after 9/11. So this would have been early, spring of 2002 timeframe.
Right. That's, yeah. Just as an aside, I remember at TBS, so I went to TBS in 2018, and obviously Iraq and Afghanistan where everyone had studied and learned about that. But then
Sure.
one of the instructors was talking about the Philippines. I'm like, the Philippines? What are we doing in the Philippines? And then that was right after the Battle of Marawi. So that was a very eye-opening. So very interesting that that's
Right.
very much still an active part of
Yeah.
counter.
So that's right. Yeah. We had some assistance to Philippine forces going on down there, and I was fortunate to be a rifle company commander that got to go out there with some construction, some CBs, Navy CBs, and a company of Marine Engineer Support Battalion folks, and we created a naval construction task group. So really kind of a naval integrated counterinsurgency being not necessarily out closing with and destroying the enemy, but enabling civil government to govern and enabling local security forces to secure. And so it was really the beginnings at the time. Anyway, it was the beginnings of what would eventually continue to develop through our experiences in Iraq and Afghanistan into a pretty mature counterinsurgency coin strategy and tactics. And so there was a lot to learn, but it was a good experience.
Fair enough. And now that I'm thinking about it, so that was just after the kickoff of OEF, but OIF hadn't even started at that
Correct. No, it was kind of the only thing from a ground perspective, because OEF, of course, we were conducting operations up in Afghanistan, I think, but OIF had not kicked off yet. So it really was kind of the 9/11 had happened, and we were kind of, okay, what's next? And everybody was kind of in a hold. We know something's going to happen, but we don't know what. This opportunity came up for us to go and do this, and it was good. It's good.
Fair enough. So looking ahead, so obviously we discussed a little bit about going straight from company command to working for the Undersecretary of Defense.
Yeah.
So it was 04 to 07.
Yeah, that's a learning curve like you write about, you know. I mean, yeah, that's right.
For sure. Then straight to Battalion XO for 17. So good old 29 Palms.
Loved it. I tell Marines all the time, and I'd say this to anybody, but I've got two favorite duty stations in the Marine Corps, and it's Okinawa and 29 Palms. And I enjoyed my time at Pendleton, and I've enjoyed my time. I a couple Pentagon, and I couldn't say that was enjoyable, but it was good. It was good, satisfying work.
Certainly, yeah.
But boy, 29 Palms, what a wonderful place. I truly enjoyed it.
I will say, so for my comparatively limited experience, I've been to 3rd LAR in 29 Palms.
Your Wolfpack there, yeah.
Oh yes, and obviously, the desert is perfect for a mechanized type force.
Sure.
And then my only other experience is Okinawa, and then a little bit in Camp Fuji.
But you were up at Camp Schwab there in Okinawa. That wonderful place.
Absolutely.
Little isolated up there, but still. Yeah, I really enjoyed my time. I was fortunate. I went to 17 out of the Fletcher School. I went to Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University just for a year between OSD and back to the fleet. But executive officer at 17, and we trained up and deployed to Iraq. And I was in a little place just outside of Fallujah and Garma there, and had a great experience. It was good. It was kind of toward the end of things. We were winding down. We were really turning things back over and transitioning back over to Iraqi forces. And then I came back, and within 6 months, the regimental commander, who was now forward deployed to Afghanistan, called and said, "Hey, I need an OPSO." The current OPSO had been selected for command, and he needed to get back. And I was hanging out in 29 Palms, recovering from the deployment, and kind of running things with the remain behind element there, and keeping the lights on for the regiment while it was gone. And probably one of the most challenging periods of my career, I would offer, then, was going out and being the operations officer for the regiment for RCT 7 in Southern Helmand.
So a couple questions there. So
sure.
You said you were in Garma, is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Is that, so again, quick aside, have you by chance read When the Tempest Gathered?
I haven't.
Okay, so it's
I'm writing it down though.
So it's Colonel Andrew Milburn just retired a few years ago.
Oh yeah.
And he's the way it was spelled was Karma with a K. Is
that
the same
got
place?
Yeah, the Iraqis, the way I don't know. I mean,
okay.
If it was Japanese, I could tell you how it's pronounced. But
fair enough.
But yeah, Karma. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he must have, when he was there, he must have either been right before or right after you, because I'm trying to remember exactly.
Right before us, we ripped with him.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we ripped relief in place. We conducted a relief in place with his battalion.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
For all our listeners, very interesting man, by the way. If keeping up with what he's doing today, especially, might be eye-opening what he's doing over with the Mozart group. But anyway, so moving on. So from, what was it, 2000, right after 2007, after you got back from OSD, going straight to being a Battalion XO, and then straight into being the OPSO for RCT 7. So it was 2008 to 2009 as an XO, and then 2009 to 2011. So total of, math for Marines here, 4 or 5 years?
Well, 3 years at 7th Marines, and then PCS, but then assumed command at 2-5 and went right back to Afghanistan.
And this was all back to back operational.
Oh yeah, it was yep. Yeah, I've talked to my wife about that.
I'm sure she was thrilled.
Yeah, but it was, yes, it was, look, it was challenging, but it was, it's what we need. I don't know. I never felt like it was onerous. It was the mission. It's what we needed to be doing. And so I, went to Iraq, came back, and was happy to serve with the remain behind element. But going out to Afghanistan was so this was interesting because you talk about just the human dimension of war, and I know here at Naval Postgraduate School we focus a lot on the science, but we shouldn't forget that there's the art and the science of war, and a lot of the science of war has to do with humans and the human dimension.
Certainly does.
Of course, regiments were doing 1-year deployments. Here I had been in Iraq and came back for a few months, got a little bit of a breather, and then deployed and linked up with the regimental staff as the OPSO. I was a major still at the time, but as the OPSO in the middle of their deployment, and they had been running 100 miles an hour. I mean, they were going, and so then I got there halfway through this and really kind of had to pick up with all this momentum they had and to insert myself as an operations officer, and fortunately just had some fantastic people around me who helped orient me on the problem sets and just took care of things that needed to be taken care of, where I didn't have all the background that the rest of the staff had, and yet I was driving this staff from the operational side of it. And that's where you really just saw the whole team come together. And I truly believe that we all bring weaknesses, we all bring strengths to the team, and when we value people for the strengths they bring, and then accept everything else, and as a team we all end up covering each other's backs, and that's where the real strength in unity of effort comes, is that recognition. The differences we bring to the table are our strength.
So that's wow. So there's a few different points I want to dig in there. So looking at you'd said, I mean, going straight from being battalion XO to an RCT OPSO, you'd mentioned that it never really got onerous, and so just to keep in mind, so obviously, as you mentioned, this time frame.
And by that I mean, I always felt I had purpose.
Oh,
it was important stuff we were doing. I thought
absolutely
challenging, yes. Weighty, yes.
Yeah.
But not burdensome in the way of I don't want to be here or anything.
So I can definitely believe that, because if I have my timeline straight here, so this was when you were, as you'd mentioned, when you were an XO for the 1-7, this is when things are starting to turn over to the Iraqis.
Correct, in 2009.
But then going into Afghanistan, I mean, if you just look at a chart of NATO casualties in Afghanistan, like 2010, 2011, it really starts to climb
that's right.
up.
Yeah, so keep in mind this is Southern Helmand, which was kind of the main effort at the time. We were trying to the river, the Helmand River, with a series of population centers and a place called Marja, and so we were really fighting our way through Marja, and then trying to close what we called the Fish Hook, this area in Southern Helmand along the river there. And so you have some phenomenal battalion commanders there who were pushing hard on expanding that security bubble and opening up economic opportunities in these population centers, and which meant that across all of our lines of effort, all of our both security and economic and schools and all the things that needed to come together to make a viable community, we're pushing on all that on all fronts at all times, and so it was a very different deployment from between the Iraq deployment, the 2009 deployment, and the 2010 deployment.
Right.
But I would say that experience was so formative for me because that later that year, when in 2011, I took command of 2-5, 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines, and immediately was told, your deployment will be back to Afghanistan, and the amount of, I don't want to say confidence in an arrogant way, but the amount of it was assuring to know that okay, seen this before.
Mm-hmm.
It was 2-5 had not been to Afghanistan. We were not on an Afghanistan rotation, so I had so we were really reorienting from the MU as a MU dedicated battalion to reorienting onto an Afghanistan problem set. And this time we went up north, and when we got back to Musakala and Nowzad, which was my districts were in Musakala and Nowzad, so north of Sangin and a little further out west. And so I had in my own head a fairly clear appreciation for what needed to happen and how we could approach it in a deliberate way. And I again had a wonderful staff that just supported me and really gelled as a team. And so it was that time in Southern Helmand with RCT 7 and seeing the leadership in each of those battalions that came through and fought in support of in the regiment, and then to take those examples and to be able to in my best way apply the things that I saw, the examples I saw in the at the time Lieutenant Colonel Ben Watson, who now has 1st Marine Division, and then Lieutenant Colonel Kyle Ellison, who's at McWill now, and who I got to serve with at 3rd Marine Division at 3 MEF.
Mm-hmm.
Just some fantastic examples of what right looks like.
That going from being at the RCT level to being a battalion commander, seeing what all the battalions were doing and what was working, and then things that I'm sure could be improved, but just huge across the board.
Huge. Yeah.
So 2 things. Just remember, make sure I have my history straight. So Marja, that was the first large operation where the ANA was integrated into working with U.S. forces, correct?
Yeah, they were. So I got there after the initial push into Marja. So I did not plan the initial push into Marja, but yes,
okay.
There were the ANA were brought into the planning process. The government of Marja, what it would look like was initially formed outside of Marja and then brought into Marja. So it really was kind of a holistic, not just the tactics of, secure, we say clear, hold, build, that construct, but it was, plan the build during the secure phase and during the planning phase. So looking at all the requirements that would be needed, and then just it was defended, and so a lot of fighting, but then as things settled back in, you saw a lot of good people in Marja making building their own communities up, and it came with its challenges, of course, but it was good. It's good to see.
Post RCT 7, so that was 2011. So then you said Battalion Commander 2-5. Right, that's right. That's right.
Afghanistan. That's right.
You were up in Nowzad, correct?
Right. So we had 2 districts in for my battalion.
Okay.
Yes. So I primarily yes. So we had command and control in both Nowzad in the little village center there, and then in right down in the middle of Musakala, which is just adjacent to Nowzad.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then Musakala, that was a fairly big population center.
Yeah, it's pretty big.
Okay.
Yeah, sure was. Mm-hmm.
It
was right on the edge of a place called Zamindawar, which is a pretty significant kind of, I'd say Taliban, but economics. A lot of their poppy development and stuff like that came out of that area. So it was pretty. I looked at my map, and Sangin was really tough, and I wasn't down in Sangin. I wasn't fighting down there, but I was a little further north of that, and so everything northeast and west of me was red. I could look south and see the Georgians down south of me, and then 1-7, my old battalion 1-7 at the time down in Sangin. So everything in 3 directions was kind of on the red side, so there was no shortage of opportunity there.
Certainly. Interesting. I didn't realize the Georgians were out there, which I also did not realize until fairly recently. Georgia is not a NATO member, but they were out in Afghanistan supporting our efforts out there.
Did phenomenal work. I mean, they were my southern flank. I interacted regularly with the Georgians, and we had some Anglico and some advisor teams there with them. But they're some great warriors. Yeah,
certainly. Yep. Many of our allies, because if I remember correctly, Nowzad, that used to be part of the British Army's AO, correct?
So is Masakala.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So did that turnover happen before you, or
before me? Oh yeah, long before me. Yeah, that whole area had been cleared, and then actually RCT-7 before I got there on my previous deployment, had gone back up and established a foothold in Nowzad. And that foot area is called the foot, a little big piece of terrain that looks like a foot. So they had done some operations to clear and hold that, and then that had slowly expanded through the various battalion rotations. And Musakala was the same way, and we just worked that out, and then began the process of transitioning to the Afghans. And so this was interesting for me when you see how all of these experiences kind of culminate, because the experience of transitioning in Iraq was both challenging from a counting all your ash and trash and getting everything turned back in and closing up the AO and turning it over to a much smaller coalition force, and turning over responsibility to the Iraqis and the risks that come with that.
Right.
I had a great example in a battalion commander that I was able to work with when I was in Iraq to see that portion of it. And then, of course, during the RCT-7 experience, the experience of seeing these heavily engaged battalions doing great stuff there. And then my deployment as a battalion commander, really a culmination of all of those things at once, where we were transitioning, but we were still we still had a pretty determined threat in the area. And so, we had to be pretty capable of both. And then I thought it was interesting to see how my experience kind of culminated there in that battalion command experience, where all of those experiences came to bear to help see us through a successful deployment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of things going on currently, because 2011 to 2012, that was, things are still quite kinetic in that time frame.
Yeah, it sure was.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us in the Trident Room. For more information about today's guests and topics, please visit the show notes. The Trident Room podcast has been brought to you by the Naval Postgraduate School Alumni Association and Foundation. For questions, comments, and suggestions, please email us at tridentroompodcasthost@nps.edu and find us online at nps.edu/tridentroompodcast.